Scotty Milas, Scott Milas, franchisecoach.com. Hey, another podcast, All Things Considered Franchising. Know you know, and what's your why? I have I'm really pleased to bring on a guest today that really has tenure in the franchising industry. Now, I'm not gonna go into the number of years. I'll let you guys all do that on your own. But if you wanted to put your finger on the pulse of the industry in all aspects, whether it's franchising a business, the franchise development, the operations side, my guest today, Gary Occhiogrosso, is probably, just one of those guys that just everybody knows in the franchising industry. And I'm privileged to have him on because, as Gary will tell you, he's quite busy and he just doesn't do this for anybody. So I'm kind of honored to have him. I've known Gary for a long time. We've kind of bumped into each other at trade shows, conferences, educational things. So Gary, welcome to All Things Considered Franchising.
Well,
good to have you.
Thank you for having me, Scott, and thank you for your kind words. And sometimes it's a bit strange when I think back at the years, because I'm still having fun and I'm still doing this. And for as many years as I've been doing it, which is about 35, in my mind, I'm going to continue to do it for another 35 years. That's how much I enjoy this business, and I enjoy the people in the business, because it's filled with people like you, people who care and share and want to do the right thing for not only franchisors, but people who want to get into the business. And that's what we all sort of live for.
Right.
In the business.
Now, Gary, you're a managing partner of Franchise Growth Solutions. You obviously have a tenured and a history in franchise development, a franchise coach, but your focus has been for almost a decade now, I guess, is managing partner building Franchise Growth Solutions, which, if I read between the lines, is really helping people franchise their business, scale it, but also helping existing franchises with development, operationals, support, and really kind of putting it all together so that it's a better, a better bucket to present to people who may be interested in the brand. Is that correct? I mean, share some thoughts about your Franchise Growth Solutions.
Sure, and thank you for asking. And you're spot on. And there's sort of three reasons for it, or motivations, if you will, and how it all developed. Many years ago, I was a franchise consultant, essentially on the sales side. And then one of my clients, actually, we grew to a point where I actually became part of the company. It was a grilled chicken concept in New York. And I was, quote, gainfully employed for about 15 or 18 years as a franchisor with several companies, usually in a C-suite position, but gainfully employed. But over the years, if I would be doing a seminar or a webinar or something at a show, invariably someone would come up to me and say, "Hey, I got a question, or can you work with me on this?" And I always found myself saying, "Well, I would like to, just buy me lunch, because I can't really work for you. I'm gainfully employed. It would be a conflict of interest," what have you. About 8 years ago, maybe 9 now, I said, you know what, enough is enough. I really want to get involved and do other things, in the industry, and my job was getting in the way, so to speak.
Right.
Okay.
That's a good way of putting it. Yep.
That's the way I could say it. So we launched Franchise Growth Solutions really as sort of a four-siloed company. What I had realized over the years, and I'm sure you're aware of, is that there are companies that do franchise development, meaning they'll take the entrepreneur that has the good idea and the business model, and they'll do things like write manuals and work with their attorney to get an FDD and get them ready to franchise. And they do just that. And then there are companies that are referred to as FSOs, franchise sales organizations.
Right. Yep.
And what they do is they take those already existing franchisors, and what they do is become sort of an outsourced sales department for them. Yep. So I thought it would be interesting to combine that with two other things that I had worked on over the years. One is building infrastructure, because I had learned that emerging brands and startup brands, if they go out and they sell and you bring in 3, 4, 5, 10, whatever number of franchisees, if you're a startup or an emerging brand, you probably don't have, nor do you have the financial capability to hire a director of real estate, a director of procurement, a chief operating officer. How do you set up supply chain? How do you do this? So what we do is we bring all of that to the table as an infrastructure piece.
Right.
And then we also do the funding, the connections for funding, and if at exit or cash infusion, the connection with private equity. So we do development, sales, infrastructure, and private equity. There's no other company in the country that does it all under one roof.
Okay.
We believe that it's important because if we're going to build, let's say we're going to build the brand, we're going to build the franchise, we're going to build it because if we're the person selling it, we want to make sure that that is built the right way and the best way, and it validates, and that the franchisee is going to get everything that they expect and everything they need to be successful. Because if the franchisee is successful, we get to sell more franchises because they validate.
Right.
So it's all connected. That's basically what we do and how we got involved and what the motivation was.
So let's start from the beginning here in regards to some of the listeners, people that are paying attention, to this podcast, who have a small business. Maybe they have a couple of locations, and they're saying to themselves, "How do I scale my business? I'm already working, 90 hours a week. I mean, I'm exaggerating a little bit, but somebody says I really want to scale it." And, somebody has thrown out the idea a couple of times of franchising. Why would somebody consider franchising? Because when you look at brands, I can't even call it a brand because it's not a franchise, but when you look at In-N-Out, they've done it all their own. Chipotle's done it on their own as far as corporate stores. But why would somebody really reach out and think or consider franchising the business versus taking that In-N-Out or Chipotle approach, or even Starbucks, which, to me is just a mound of potential issues and problems that you could have. But maybe walk us through that conversation that you're having with somebody initially who's thinking about it, or wants to pick up the phone and call Gary and say, "Hey, this is what I've been thinking, help me out."
So there's a couple of reasons why. I guess first I'd like to address the three companies that you mentioned,
Okay.
because I have some opinions on that. In-N-Out Burger, as good as they are, they're not east of the Mississippi because they're trying to do it all on their own. So they're not a brand that, other than their cult status, they're not a brand that has notoriety in the world because they have thousands of units. And by the way, that may be exactly how they want it. So this is not about being a judge. This is about being a witness. That may be what they want. Chipotle, in my opinion, could have 30 or 40,000 stores if they franchised. They've gotten to the level that they've gotten as a company organization because they're a public company. They've got plenty of dough. They can get in there. They've got a great system of developing people. But at the end of the day, they've got a bricks and mortar business with a lot of capital expenditure on the street, tons of employees, and there's just a lot of moving parts. Starbucks is sort of the same, is sort of the same thing, but because of their ease of operation in terms of what they do, their ability to grow, and they also do some licensing, that's helped them. So for me, even though those three companies you mentioned are successful, in my humble opinion, they would be far more successful if in fact they franchised. So why? Number one, they wouldn't be using their own capital to open up new units. They'd be using the capital of franchisees who are invested in the business. Number two, their labor load, their labor line, they wouldn't have tens of thousands of employees. Those employees would be the employees of hundreds and hundreds of franchisees. So that's a piece.
That's a good point.
You wouldn't be involved in the day-to-day. And this is where franchisors and startup franchisors have some challenges, because what I try to preach and teach, and I learned it, again, my mentor is a guy named Michael Gerber, who wrote the book, The E-Myth Revisited, which, I literally give 75 to 100 of those books away every year on my own nickel, because I just think it's something that people in the business should understand. But what I'm getting at is that the crux of that is understanding the difference between the work of the business and the business. So just because you understand the work of the business, you might be really good at making pizza. it doesn't mean you know how to run a pizza franchise and scale it. So the first thing you have to do is kind of cross that bridge. So this is part of the learning curve in terms of what the payoffs are. So
Right.
you ultimately you get into a different business, you get into the franchise business, you don't have the capital expenditure, you don't have the all of the people, all of the employees and everything that goes along with that. And you don't have the day-to-day operational issues that you would if you were running all these stores on your own, so to speak, or even your own company stores or 2 or 3 stores. So those are sort of the nuts and bolts reasons. There's one other very big reason, very big in my mind. And that is, I'm a practitioner of the idea that nothing is forever, even if you're building your franchise or company.
Interesting point.
You're building your company for let's say you're building it for generational wealth or generational legacy. Even if that's the case, at some point in time, you are going to exit that business, or your children are going to exit that business. And what I've learned from having just numerous conversations with private equity people and being involved in brands that were eventually sold to private equity companies, and being involved in that arena in the sense that we get involved in those introductions, this is what I've learned. I've learned that when the bottom line, the EBITDA line, as we say, when that's driven by the profits of company operations, let's say you own 5 pizza shops, okay, or whatever, okay,
Right.
You're in the pizza business, but you own them, and you've got $1 million in EBITDA from company operations, basically profits from selling pizzas. Someone who buys that business, and business brokers tell me this all the time, is probably looking at paying somewhere between 2 and 4 times the bottom line as a
Even
multiple.
a number. That cash flow. Yep, exactly.
That's pretty standard. Now, let's take that same $1 million, but it's not driven by the sale of pizza in our example, but it's driven by royalties. The private equity companies are willing to look at that and go, wait a minute, that's an 8 or a 9 or a 10 multiple. So now instead of having a $3 million company, you have a $12 million company. And you don't have any CapEx out on the street, and you don't have a ton of employees making pizzas. Okay, I'm just using this as an example. So the kiss at the end, the exit, the value of your company is greatly increased when the profit is from royalties, because investors, private equity companies, buyers, they look at that, they go, okay, it's endlessly scalable. I could build 1,000 of these because I'm not in the pizza business. I'm in the pizza franchise business. I don't have to hire 10,000 employees to make pizzas. I just have to have enough of an organization to take care of my franchisees. So if you think about that, that's like tremendous. And at the end of the day, I can maybe take it from 50 or 100 units to 1,000 units and find the next equity player that wants to give me a high multiple. So to me, those are the reasons. You're doing the business, not the work of the business. You're creating legacy of the brand. You don't have CapEx. You don't have employee issues. You don't have operational issues on a day-to-day level. And the end play, the exit, the multiple at exit, oftentimes is much, much higher than if you were to sell a business that you were simply operating day to day.
Those are great points, Gary. And I think it's very informative because, somebody said to me the other day that I was talking to a very polished franchise development person who's very good at working with private equity groups that are looking at investing into franchise systems, and whether to become the franchisor or own 15, 20 of the brands. But they said it to me this way. They said, outside of the 4 walls in franchising of the $5 footlong and the golden arches, there's a lot in franchising. And I'm sure, as in your tenured, polished history being in this industry, and now working with organizations that want to kind of take that next step in scaling, one of the things that I've always seen about franchising and business in the franchising world, that these brands have a lot of moving parts. And it can be very overwhelming for that guy who owns 2 or 3 pizzerias who's now thinking about 10 or 15, there's just so many different parts. I mean, you and I know, but our audience doesn't know that there's the operational side, there's the marketing side, there's the development side, there's the H&R side, there's the financing side. So is it safe to say that your organization now takes all these moving parts and helps consolidate it and departmentalize it to make it a more attractive pie to be able to offer somebody as a franchise?
Yep. Yep. That's a great question. Thank you, Scott, for that question, because that's exactly what we focus on. Again, if we think about a few things, and I mean, we have brands in all categories. We have home service businesses, we have bricks and mortar retail businesses, but truth be told, we specialize in the restaurant business for a bunch of reasons. First of all, a lot of people don't like it. Okay. I happen to love it because I sort of grew up in that. I started out as a franchisee of Dunkin' Donuts. So I sort of cut my teeth in that. But you're absolutely correct. So what we need to do is we look at what are the compelling reasons that people get involved in franchising on a multiple level issue. Now that's sort of taking it to the highest level. Okay. It doesn't always start there. Obviously people come in, they buy one franchise and then they build it out or what have you. But the goal is to think about what we believe is what's going to make your brand, your business compelling to a multiple unit, multi-brand operator who understands how to build an organization, how to deploy capital, how to develop people, and go. Well, if you peel back the onion, because there's a lot of BS out there and all these, I've got a 10-point list and I got a 50-point. It really comes down to two things. And for those of us who have ever attended the multi-unit franchise conference, you know what it comes down to. It comes down to cost of entry and simplicity of operation. And those two things are very much tied together. So how does that relate to the food business? Again, you have the entrepreneurial individual. He has 3, 4, 5 operations, and maybe she's doing real well. And I'm using he and she in there because I don't want anyone to think it's only guys that do this. There's plenty of women in this business that are outrageously successful. The key is getting them away from the mentality that in a restaurant, I got to have 60 things on the menu.
Exactly. The point I was going to bring. Yep.
Someone's going to come in 3 months from now and order that one thing. So why do I use that as an example? Because it impacts so many things. So let's just think about that. If I have some items on that menu that aren't really selling more than, say, 5 or 6% of my overall product mix, so that's the first thing we look at.
Right.
We teach entrepreneurs, sell what's selling. Don't worry about everything else. What happens there? Well, what happens there is I probably have more waste, which drives my food cost up, which makes the compelling reason to invest in a franchise, the unit economics, it diminishes that because my food cost is up because I'm throwing stuff out that I don't sell, but I still want to keep it on the menu because it's grandma's recipe. So I got to have it on my menu.
Or that one customer that comes in a year.
One customer, right? Exactly. So it impacts food cost. Now it impacts your footprint. Okay, so maybe I need a bigger steam table or a bigger cold table because I've got to have 40 things there instead of 20. Okay, so it impacts my footprint. I need a bigger line. I need a bigger store. It impacts my rent. It impacts my prep, which impacts my labor. It impacts my supply chain issue because I can't go back to my vendor and say, I'm only selling 3 proteins, not 5. And since I'm now no longer selling 3 tons of chicken a year, I'm selling 10 because I got rid of pork and tofu and beef or whatever. Now I need a better price on that item that happens to be one of my highest components that will drive my cost down, will drive my supply chain issues. It will allow me to scale.
Right.
But it all starts from the idea that I want to do one thing and I want to do it better than anyone else.
Right.
And
exactly.
To go back to your example of Starbucks, when Starbucks first came out, came to the East Coast, because they were out, I think, in 71, 72. First time I was ever in a Starbucks, I thought, okay, this is kind of cool. At that time, they still had the purple couches in there and everything. And I thought the environment was very cool, but Growing up as an Italian, having espresso was like not a big deal. Okay. But I understood what they were doing. They took one product, or let's call it espresso based beverages. They took that category and they collapsed their brand so small into that one thing. Now, of course, they sell a lot of other things, but in the mind's eye of the guest, they collapsed it down to espresso based beverages. No one else was doing it.
Right.
And by default, they became the leader.
No,
Okay.
you're
They
absolutely
became the
right.
leader in it. And
Yeah,
now everyone was trying to be Starbucks. Okay.
exactly.
So you really have to understand what is your signature product? What is the things that people define the brand, by the way, not the entrepreneur. How have people defined you? What are you known for? And how can you take ownership of the words and the products around that thought? And that's what you take to the world of franchising, because that's what makes you successful. Because at the end of the day, does the world really need another pizza concept or another burger
Exactly.
concept or another
Well,
painting concept?
look, you and I have, we both have extensive experience being in the food industry, both, probably as an independent and you as a franchisee. I have both. But, one of the questions or one of the pushbacks that I always get from clients, that when you start presenting food options to them, they say, well, there are just too many pizza places. There's too many chicken places, too many sub places. And I go, well, that's a good thing. And they go, why? I said, because those items are successful, or those types of businesses are successful because they please the masses. There are a lot of people that eat chicken. There are a lot of people that love subs. There are a lot of people that eat pizza. You just have to be better than everybody else in your area. I
Mm-hmm.
said, so if you're not up for that challenge, then you're probably right. Food isn't for you. But,
Yep.
I think you and I have had this discussion before.
Yeah.
Food is not hard work.
It,
It's just long work, and you got to have thick skin.
And quite honestly, Scott, in my opinion, it's not about the food, because everybody has their favorite whatever,
Right.
their favorite
Right.
pizza, their favorite sub, their favorite coffee. So I never play towards taste. I never, when someone says we make the best, blah, okay,
It's the
well,
experience.
so
Are you touching on the experience then?
it's the experience. When we interview an individual who wants to franchise their business, I learned from reading a lot of Peter Thiel stuff. He's the founder of PayPal. Um, Peter Thiel asks some contrarian questions of folks when he was interviewing them to go work at PayPal. And so my contrarian question that I ask really any entrepreneur who's thinking about franchising: tell me and describe your business. Tell me all about your business, but you can't tell me, or use in the description, anything about the product.
Interesting.
And they freak. They totally freak out. And I tell them, I don't need an answer now. I need you to think about it. And some of them come back and they get it. They talk about their vibe. They talk about their culture. They talk about how people feel when they leave their restaurant. How does our experience make people feel? And it has nothing to do with the food. Okay.
Right.
Because I might like your burger better than somebody else's burger. That's not relevant.
Right.
Okay. It's what are your points of differentiation? And if your points of differentiation are solely, because I don't want anybody to get the idea that I'm saying you can sell crappy product, okay, at the wrong price. Okay. I'm not saying that.
No, no,
Okay. What I'm
yeah.
saying
No, I
is,
get it.
it's not about price and product. If you compete only on price and product, you're going to get your brains beat out, because someone will always come up with a better product at a better price. So stop doing that and start to focus in on how people feel when they leave your establishment or when you've performed the service for them, because that's the true point of differentiation.
No, I agree. I think it's that wow factor, and the wow factor isn't necessarily the taste of the food. I mean, look, like you said, that helps, but it's really, that experience, that customer service, that, so I mean, there are a lot of factors. Let's switch gears a little bit, because you, like I said, a number of times during our conversation here, you've been kind of had your finger to the pulse of the industry, franchising. Um, Obviously you believe in franchising. It's been good to you. Um, uh, where in your eyes, and look, we've come a long way in franchising the last 10, 15, 20 years. The days of spending $250,000, $300,000 to franchise a business are a little behind us. There's a little bit more simplicity to it, although it's still a lot of paperwork. But what are your thoughts about where the state of the industry is now? People that are looking to franchise a business and people that are looking to become a franchisee. I mean, there's a great track record here, versus independents as far as success rate. So where do you see the industry, and maybe touch on where would you like to see the industry go as far as being to make some simple changes that could make itself better?
All right, there's a whole bunch of stuff there, Scott.
Yeah, just take, the 45-second,
yeah,
60-second again, we can
let's
always,
unpack it. Let's unpack it. I think if you're looking to become a franchisor, what you want to focus in on, number one, is your concept a concept that has appeal beyond, your customer base and maybe in your locale. I think, companies like Franchise Growth Solutions, we can come in and we do what we call a franchise feasibility study before we ever even get engaged in a brand. And that has everything to do with the numbers as well as the concept and what do we believe could be an outcome in terms of scalability. So from a franchisor's point of view, I think you need to look at those things. You need to exercise a certain level of patience. Entrepreneurs are folks who generally see the future and they think that everybody else sees it with them and they think that it's going to happen overnight. And franchising is sort of like an evolution. You think nothing's happening, but things are happening. So you have to exercise, in addition to all of that, you have to exercise a certain amount of patience. On the franchisee side, to me, I think everyone should be in their own business. Okay. That's just me. I think that's part of the American dream is running your own business. Why I believe franchising is the best way to do that and the best development tool is if you do your homework, if you work with a consultant like yourself who can really guide the franchise buyer and navigate the labyrinth of hundreds of different franchises, and you come to terms with one that you feel good about management, you feel good about their track record of success, their franchisees are validating properly, and you can envision yourself doing that or building that kind of a brand, franchising to me makes all the sense in the world. What I will say about both of those things, franchisor and franchisee, because we always hear two words. I always hear two words. I hear the word entrepreneur and I hear the word passion. Those two words can be very helpful or they can be detrimental to your success. Why do I say that? The franchisor needs to be entrepreneurial. They need to continue to create ways to help their franchisees to make money.
Yep.
The franchisee, when we see ads that say, be an entrepreneur, buy a franchise, I cringe because the best franchisees are not entrepreneurs. They may be entrepreneurial minded, but the best franchisees are folks who follow a system, the system that the franchisor creates. So that's how we need to really look at that word. And then the other word, passion, I caution people on this. Passion will only get you so far. I am a passionate bass player and singer. That is my passion. If I ever attempted to do that in the real world, I'd be broke and unsuccessful and probably not very happy. I don't know because sand doesn't go up the hourglass. Okay. So it's good to have passion for what you're doing, but you need to understand that passion doesn't get you there. Purpose gets you there. What's your purpose? What's your purpose in life? What are you really good at? What do you do that you find enjoyable and you bring to other people where they learn from you? What is your purpose? So if we look at that from a franchisee's point of view and say, well, I'm really passionate about the food business, but I'm really bad at it. And I don't know if I could follow the system because I like tinkering around in the kitchen. Maybe that's not a good business for me. And that's, look, that's the beauty of what you do. You help guide people and keep their thinking, sort of on path, because in our business, there are there are companies, folks, individuals, again, I'm not being a judge, just a witness. They're either out there to collect a commission, or they're out there to,
Exactly. Yep.
they're out there because they want to get a fee to develop some brand, and they want to write manuals and all that other stuff. That doesn't serve anyone any long-term good. And that to me is bad karma, and karmic debt is always paid at some point. So I
Right.
think you got to have a good moral compass. You have to understand the meaning of the word entrepreneur. You have to understand the meaning of the word passion. And then you have to follow a path that makes sense for you, that has some level of quantification. And again, I think that's where folks like you, and you in particular, come into play, because you can teach that person who's never been involved in a business what's the right fit for them as a
Right.
franchise.
Skill set. Wow. Gary, a lot of interesting points. I think you've taken this to a different perspective for our listening audience, especially for people that are looking to potentially franchise their business. Any last suggestions, anything you want to mention, anything that I maybe forgot to ask you? Unfortunately, our time's winding down here,
Yeah.
but hopefully we'll have you back on again and talk about some other things within franchising. But anything you want to just mention, any points that that you think are kind of crucial as people start this investigation?
Yeah, I would say, if you're investigating the idea of franchising your business, work with the end in mind. What is it you're trying to achieve? Not just the next step, but what is the long term that you're trying to achieve? And if you're looking to become a franchisee, I would say work with the end in mind.
Yeah.
Look down the road and say, well, what do I really want out of this? So for me, it's understanding the long-term picture. And the metaphor I use is the airline pilot that you take off from LAX and you're flying to Hawaii. The pilot doesn't see the airport in Honolulu, but he's got a flight path. He's got a flight plan.
Exactly.
And he or she is making minor adjustments along the way. And eventually they see the runway lights in Honolulu. But if they don't have that as their goal, then they could just aimlessly be flying around and never make it to the airport. So working with the end in mind and having a clear picture of what you're trying to achieve would be sort of the last word that I would want to leave with you, either on the franchise side, or the franchisor, or the franchisee side.
Great points, Gary. Well, Gary, I appreciate your time. I know you're a busy guy, and it's always great catching up with you, and I'm looking forward to bumping into you again, and hopefully we can have you back in the near future to talk about some other things about franchising. But at this point, this is Scotty Milas, ScottMilasFranchiseCoach.com. You'll see below the information on how to get in touch with Gary, or reach out to me and I can make the intro on your behalf. Another episode of All Things Considered Franchising. Have a great week, and we'll catch up with you next time.